It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. What's up? What's happening? I'm Craig Hoffman. That is Logan Paulsen. And Logan, it's a family affair today. Your long-lost cousin is with us.
I know, man. It's so exciting. You know, Grant's like just one of those guys that's a fantastic human being. He actually got me kind of started in this, so it's really cool to kind of be talking to him now on this
Now
platform.
You get to have him on your show?
Yeah, I mean, it's not as cool as his show, but it is I guess, our show. Yeah. It's nice.
Yeah. Grant Paulsen, of course, Grant and Danny on 106.7 The Fan is with us. GP, how are you, sir?
I am great, fellas. I'm happy to be on. I got to tell you, I was thrilled in 2010 when I showed up on the beat covering training camp for the first time. I don't remember if it was rookie mini camp or camp day one. I looked out on the field and I saw my last name spelled correctly. No one spells Paulsen S-E-N. Everyone spells it with an O, which is incorrect. We all know that.
Yeah, we all know that.
And I was like, well, this guy's probably not going
to. That is true.
Years later, a lot of NFL seasons later, Logan Paulsen, ladies and gentlemen, just beating people up and taking names. My guy.
There we go.
Yeah, you're a worker, man. So I'm not surprised you guys are killing it, but I'm glad to be on.
Appreciate it. And also, by the way, if you're a Nats fan, Grant and Danny continuing to go with their Nats podcast. Really good time you guys are having over there.
What a time to start a Nats podcast, bro.
Yeah.
They came to us like, I don't know, a day before they traded Max Scherzer and Trey Turner. And they're like, you guys should start a Nats podcast. We're like, yeah, no doubt. There's a lot of people who want to see them win. And then they immediately traded everyone. They've been the worst team in baseball since. But we get to talk about their prospects, literally and figuratively, I guess. So, yeah, if you like the Nats, if you like nerdy baseball talk and talking about Rapsodo machines and building pitches in laboratories, that podcast is for you.
Yeah. Remind folks the name of it real quick so they can find it.
It is called Bustin' Loose Baseball.
There
Probably
you go.
named it lots of losses, but we named it Bustin' Loose Baseball.
Taking L's with Grant and Danny. All right. So here's what we're going to do today on this here podcast. We are going to talk about the latest ownership news or lack of news. Is there news? Is there not news? Depends on which Twitter feed you're reading and how screwed up your For You page is on that hellscape of a mobile application. And then we'll get into kind of how that did or didn't affect free agency. We'll get into free agency itself, kind of give some grades now that we're through the meat of it, and then we'll go from there. So, Grant, you had a great tweet over the weekend where you basically said, hey, on this ownership sale situation, you know, if your wife is pregnant and you guys are expecting, it's about time to grab the go bag and go to the hospital. You seem to think whatever you were told to spark that we're getting very close to the finish line here. What can you tell us about what you know of where we are at, as of recording time, 9:25 a.m. on Monday morning?
Yeah, I've been really confident for really a few months that this was going to happen. When I initially heard they were considering a sale, the antenna goes up because someone like Dan Snyder doesn't go from hell-bent on never selling to considering a sale. Remember, when they went from I'm never going to change the name to working on changing the name, it was days, not weeks, not months, not years. Like, this guy digs his heels in and says it's not happening. And then eventually something changes. In the case of the name change, really, it was Fred Smith basically saying you can't use the name FedEx on FedEx Field. And then Nike and some other companies saying, we want our money if you can't change this name. So he didn't have a choice. My belief is, and the one mystery here, the $1 billion or I guess $6 billion question, is what changed between November 2nd, when he was on the field taking a picture with Jerry Jones, sending a message, in my opinion, to owners. I guess it would have been October 2nd. I'm not going anywhere. And then November 2nd, 1 month later, when they announced he and Tanya that they were trying to sell. And in that 30 days, something meteoric happened. Obviously, a couple of stories, Don Van Natta, Tish Thompson story that you talked a lot about came out, among other things. But I think behind the scenes, something happened. So all that as a backdrop to say that this week, it became very clear to me that this is imminent, that this is only a matter of time. I continue to hear rumblings and things from people that I trust, but here's the problem, and you're seeing a lot of this in the reporting, I think. We're a bunch of people with football sources. This is a billions and billions of dollar transaction, and most of us don't have anyone on either side from a business or bank standpoint. So you're just not seeing people really able to confirm what they are hearing. And that is why I think there is some of this lack of certainty with the timeline. I personally believe, based on everything I've heard, this is going to happen very soon. I do think there's a real possibility that we get some kind of a bombshell update this week about a name, an ownership group, perhaps. And then I think it's very real possibility that at the meetings that are going to be taking place starting a week from now in the end of March in Arizona, that they're actually voting on whoever strikes a deal with Dan Snyder. Now, whether that happens, that's my prediction based on what I'm hearing or not. I still firmly believe when this football season starts, there will be a new owner in place for the Washington Commanders.
I totally agree with that based off what I'm hearing. To kind of double click on a few things you said, to borrow a phrase from you guys on your show, right? One, I think the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of pressure was Irsay at the owners' meetings when he came down and was like, yeah, that guy's got to go. And you're like, whoa.
That was within the timeline, too.
Right.
You know, the 10-2 to 11-2, I'll never leave, to we're considering a sale, we've hired a bank. Irsay was smack dab in the middle of that.
And whether that was him acting, solo, but he knew that it would matter, or that was kind of a message from a bunch of owners, and Irsay was like, yeah, I'll be the one to get in front of the camera and do it. It seemed like there was some kind of internal pressure mounting that kind of amounted to, hey, man, either you sell or we throw you out. And Irsay saying it publicly seems to be the straw that broke the camel's back on that. On the sourcing side of it, which I feel like Twitter and all the social media platforms are going nuts with rumors right now. And people just need to understand that nobody knows. And when I say nobody, I mean pretty much nobody. The circle of people involved in the sale is incredibly small. And in fact, when you talk to business reporters who are covering this and have covered a lot of team sales, not just in the NFL, but a lot of leagues, what they tell you is this is the most tight-lipped group that they have ever dealt with. There's an incredibly small number of people on the banking side. It is Dan and Tanya and maybe 2 to 3 other people. And those people don't work necessarily for the team. The people that you think would know don't know. They find out information often shortly before we do. And so that is why that there's a lot of smoke, there's a lot of rumors, but the number of people that don't know things that actually know things is very small, which is why I think one of the most significant things to happen recently was Schefter breaking the Mitchell Rails thing, because Schefter doesn't have the bank sources. That's just not he's one of the best reporters in the business, but that's not the circles he operates in. And so for him, a football guy at an NFL level to get a name like that, to me says that guy's being vetted by the league. And someone was like, hey, this guy's clearly involved. Now, are they vetting multiple groups at that point still and kind of for the final bidding process? Or is it, hey, this guy's pushing us over the finish line and the Harris Rails bid is the winner? That we don't know. And some people are reading into it too much one way or the other. But those are the kinds of things that I think are interesting and worthwhile of paying attention to. But as far as I know, I talked to a reporter who I trusted late last week, and he's like, this thing's not quite as close as a lot of people think. Now, that doesn't mean that it's far, but the idea that basically his word was enjoy the games. He told me you can relax, watch the NCAA tournament. You don't need to worry about this thing getting done over the weekend.
So it's funny you say that, because I think there a lot of things can be true, right? I tweeted what I did on Friday night, which was, to your point, a kind of a joke for those of us with kids. You get to a point in a pregnancy where the birth could come at any moment. We are past X number of weeks, and you could get a call where your wife just says it's time. And when you get to that window of the pregnancy, you have to have a bag in your car at all times to stay overnight at the hospital. So that's why I said it's time to have your go bag on you. The story could break at any moment now. Hey, it's Josh Harrison, it's Rails, and this team is theirs, right? So that's why I tweeted what I did. Now, someone hit me up and they're like, they cover the league and the team, and they're like, how close is this? Can I enjoy these games tonight? Can I go out? I'm like, yes. Here's the difference. I think people think this is like a football transaction where when that breaks, the story's over. No, we just will find out sooner than later, I think, who it is, what they're trying to spend. Then it still has to be voted on and ratified. And there's this whole formal process. So I guess my point is, we haven't dealt with one of these in this town. I know in the league, you had the Broncos sale last year. It's not like there's just a black and white finish line. As soon as we hey, Harrison Rails got to $6 billion. There's an agreement in principle. Okay, well, that's great. That's breaking news. That's the bombshell. That's the plan your party time. But that's not like over then. You see what I'm saying? There's still then a bunch of hoops and things that have to happen. But I think we're close to finding out what the number's going to be and who it's going to be. I will say this. I mean, again, confirming anything's really difficult for the reason that you just said. Dan Snyder's group that he actually deals with and talks to and people that are in his circle is minuscule.
Right. I remember there's no minority owners anymore.
Correct. There's nobody other than him and Tanya and his family. His sister sits on the board. The rest of the board there's a guy from Rock Nation and some other things, but essentially the board is the Snyders. Yeah. So because of that, like people aren't talking directly to him, and to their credit, some of these other ownership groups have been very, very quiet. Now, everyone wants to assume that this is the Harrison Rails group. And if I had to bet money, here we are, March Madness, NCAA tournament, I would go to the window and I would absolutely put money on them. I was told that when Rails came along, it was a game changer, absolute categorical game changer. DC ties, possibility of RFK Stadium, gets the money across the finish line, well connected in the community, tied in with people in the building, like huge deal, right? That's great. But we don't even know. Like I've been told there's a fourth group. We've never heard who it is. How could we possibly definitively say they're not getting the team when we don't even know who that person is? And it's not based.
And there's two mystery groups, right? There's the Tillman Fertitta dude who owns the Rockets. There's the Rails Harris group. There's two others that I think we were told. And then there's Bezos.
Yes.
Who could still just come in and be like, okay, I see all this stuff happen. Dan, what about if I give you $7 billion and then it goes to Bezos, because who would turn down an extra $1 billion?
Right. So I have reason to believe that like one of the two mystery groups is like in it, legitimately. I don't know about if all four of them are. Having said that, if you're looking at the odds on a board at the sports book, the minus money pretty substantially here is on Harris and Rails. And then your plus money, maybe your top other option might be for Tita. But I'm just uncomfortable saying definitively know who it is. Here's what I keep hearing, though. And again, this is more of the speculation because I can't confirm it. But I know that I've heard this from a ton of people. It is my belief that Dan Snyder has not been in the country but once to go to Coy Gibbs' funeral in months. I mean, he is in London. Like they are gone. They're not here from what I can gather, what I've been told. On top of that, we see all the smoke. Like they're selling. They're really trying to sell the Maryland house now. The Florio report that they cleared out their offices. That's a thing. They haven't been in their offices in a long time. I didn't realize they cleared them out in December. But this is not like there's a couple things pointing toward. He stopped going to games. I mean, do people remember how unconscionable that would have been at one point, that this guy who's on the 50-yard line, who's calling down to the sideline, I'm exaggerating, but the idea that he wouldn't be at a game to me is unfathomable. And he just kind of checked out last season. So something has changed. All signs pointed all along to a sale. I'm sure you guys saw the Ben Standig report this weekend. Yeah, which I thought was pretty huge. Now, again, I already believe this thing is on, the goal line or whatever you want to say. But for people that don't know, Ben Standig of The Athletic reported this weekend that with bonus money, and Logan, maybe you could speak to this better than us, but with bonus money, which you guys know typically you're going to get within the first month, the signing bonus type cash, the Commanders, with the deals they're striking this offseason, are asking teams to push the bonus money a month or two further back. Why?
I think May 12th was the date for a lot of them.
Right. So why would you do that? It's so that the next owner has to pay that cash, and Dan Snyder doesn't, presumably. There's not really other good explanations. So all of these things are circumstantial. Maybe none of them would hold up in court, but it's a lot of stuff pointing toward, hey, the timeline here looks pretty set.
Can we just review what exactly is factual information? You know what I'm saying? Because I know there's a lot of speculation at the moment. And I know, I agree with both of you. The more I hear, the more people I talk to, it seems like something's going to happen. Don't know when, don't know who, don't know all that stuff. Can we just kind of just lay it down and be like, these are the 5 major facts, and everything else is a little bit speculative.
Yeah, definitely. I think the number one thing that we should establish is that he is selling. And I still am kind of surprised when I get tweets. Grant, I'm sure you are too. And people are like, well, what if he backs out? What if this? What if that? Like all the stuff Grant just said. I'm not just going to cut that up and be like, he's selling. Here's 5 minutes of Grant Paulsen listing all the reasons why. Right. Like he's not there anymore. He doesn't go to games. You know, they obviously engage the bank, all that kind of stuff. So number one, he's selling. 2, that sale is going through Bank of America Securities, which has processed a lot of team sales. And he is continued forward through that process. And as far as we know, there's been no reversal or out or anything at any time. I guess the third thing would be this Grant, I think is a little less like 100%, but we would be stunned if it went in any other way. It's going to be a full sale. Like Dan Snyder's no longer going to be a part of this team. There was a thought for a while that he was going to try to get minority investors and try to just boost some cash, or, you know, would there be a situation where he potentially sells minority stake in 5 years, they could buy a majority stake. That I guess is technically still on the table. We haven't heard definitively because like Grant said, we don't know all of the details yet because very few people do. But ultimately, I think it's pretty safe to say that Dan is going to be out of the franchise, out of the league as of the sale being finalized, which I think is going to happen fairly soon.
Yeah, I mean, and so I want to do exactly what Logan just said for a moment, though, right? What is actually known at this moment, which is that Dan Snyder and Tanya Snyder hired Bank of America in early November to sell part or all of this team. Okay, that is written in pen. That's confirmed by the team. Now, if your threshold is what we actually know as having been kind of confirmed by the team, there's not much after that.
Right.
Okay?
Just so fans are aware of what, but that's a big data point for sure.
It is. I would, and I understand what you're saying. I would tell you the team is not going to confirm anything.
Right.
So
I agree.
If that was the threshold always, then we wouldn't know who's signing where until the press conference, right? So that's not certainly my threshold. My threshold is people I trust. There's a lot of people I've never heard of tweeting about Dan Snyder and coming. I don't care about any of that. Like, the media people that are trustworthy and credible. I mean, Adam Schefter from a league source suggested that Rails joined this Josh Harris bid. Here's what I take, frankly, at this point as confirmation when there's no pushback. When no one comes out and says, hey, actually, no, that's not it. Because I can't tweet that the Commander should sign an offensive lineman, you know, without a thought from somebody on it, you know, within the team, right, in some way. So when I just think it's important to note, and they're doing other things like that. They're not around. They're not paying attention. So it's not like Dan Snyder or his attorney is going to say, hey, that's actually not true. But there's very little pushback. When Mike Florio reports the other day they haven't been in the building since December, I talked to Mike on my show subsequently, and I've talked to him via text since. He hasn't heard a word from anybody on that. And his point on the show was, hey, if I said something that wasn't right, someone would tell me.
Right.
You know, he's saying the employees think this is imminent. These are all things in other degrees we've talked about on the show. I've heard from employees for months that they thought this thing's going down. So what is actual fact right now confirmed by the team is very little, I would say. But this is one of those you're trying to read the tea leaves deals. And I understand the uncertainty in that, and it is important to clarify that. I would also tell people, like, you shouldn't necessarily be taking any notes on this from just random people who talk to, you know, a player at KB Toys. You know what I'm saying?
Like, they don't know anything either.
Very careful with our the people that are saying things. You know, here's how I like to judge it. If someone has nothing to lose if they're wrong, you shouldn't care if they're right.
Right.
If someone's wrong and nothing happens, like they don't have a boss or an editor, or, you know, they just tweet something else the next day, then I wouldn't worry a whole lot about if they're right or not. That's kind of how I judge it. But I understand what you're asking. I think it's an important question.
And so I think what I'm saying is, like, I agree. I think obviously there's that one kind of they've engaged with the bank to get the sale done. But I do think I agree with you in terms of like factual information. I think that report about the additional kind of person on the Harris bid. I think that's about as good as you're going to get. And then,
and I'll say too, I mean, I know for a fact, just based on how lock solid and multiple my sourcing is, like at least there was for a long time, everyone said, well, 1 or 2 people have gone and taken tours. I mean, there have been 3 ownership groups at least. I know a 4th at some point was on the verge of coming through that have like been over at the facility. I mean,
Right.
That kind of stuff's not happening if you're going, maybe we'll think about selling this thing. I also know, I was told the first day all of this came out, literally the first night. So that would have been November 2nd, from someone who had talked to Dan about it, that one of his biggest goals, if he sold this team, and at that point, it's day 1, there was a lot of speculation that maybe he wouldn't, but one of his biggest goals was there's no way he's selling this team if he can't get better and bigger than the Broncos by a margin, right? The Broncos sold for $4.6 billion. He has offers, we've reportedly heard, over $5 billion. And I still think he's going to end up getting something that starts with a 6. That's utterly speculative. That's my kind of what I'm hearing. But I think that happened when Rails joined Harris. I think Harris's number from the people that I talked to was in the 5s. Rails joined him and the number got a lot closer to 6, if not, starting with a 6. So point being, I guess if you're asking, what do we know? We know that the thing that was important to him, if he sells this team, I think he wants to be able to claim, I just sold for more than anyone ever has. And if the numbers we're hearing are actually the finish line eventually, not only football, this will be the biggest transaction of a sports franchise in the history of the world. And that is something I know as a fact is important to Dan Snyder if he sells.
Yeah, the Washington Post has reported that Tillman Fertitta's bid, I believe, came in at 5.3 initially, and then we know that, or I think we've heard, I wouldn't say we know, that the Harris Rails bid is now above that, thanks in part to what Grant was saying. That's again more of the what we've heard, not someone hard reporting it, putting a byline to it. And I would say when the Washington Post and Mark Maskey and Nikki Javala and Liz Clark put their bylines on it, you can take that word to be as good as gold. But that's kind of what we know from the number standpoint. And then the other thing that we know is that Jeff Bezos is still kind of floating around in the background. What we don't know, what speculation is how involved he is. But we know that he engaged a brokerage firm, banker. He engaged some financial institution to explore buying the team. For a while, Snyder had kept him out of the bidding or not permitted him, per the Post, from bidding. But he had formally engaged the process through a banking firm. And so we know that. And I talked to someone, a reporter who covers sports business last week, who said, my prediction's still Bezos. And that's just kind of if you want to make a football analogy, it's like, the 2017, 2018 range where, the Patriots were kind of struggling through the regular season, but you still kind of just bet on them because they were the Patriots and he was still Tom Brady. And there's kind of an element of that with Bezos, or like LeBron and during that same stretch where he's just
perfect comp. Yeah.
He's still LeBron James. And so I know they're the 4th seed in the East right now, but they're going to beat the crap out of the Raptors in the playoffs. That's what's going to happen because he's LeBron James and they're going to win the East. And then we'll see what happens.
Now, that's
kind of the Bezos thing.
You're on point. I mean, I forever, up until probably 2 weeks ago, was saying Bezos. I do think we can file into the what we actually know column that Dan Snyder would prefer it not be Bezos.
Yes.
Now that
is
do not
100%.
hear that as he would never sell the team to Bezos, but he would prefer it not to be Bezos. He doesn't. What we know is he doesn't like the Washington Post. What we know is that Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. And what we also know is that Dan Snyder wants to sell to someone other than Bezos if he can get the amount of money he needs. Now, if Bezos gave $1.5 billion more at the last minute than whoever kind of secured the number, would they go that route? Yeah, I guess they would. But frankly, again, and now we're back to, as a final thought, just my own prediction. I think that we are far enough down the road, non-Bezos, that number one, it's happening one way or the other. But also, I would bet on the non-Bezos field getting to a number that Dan views as satisfactory.
Yeah. My only question with Bezos is there an even higher level of satisfaction for Dan if he gets to think that he beat Jeff Bezos in a business deal? And that's purely speculative. That's like some armchair psychologist stuff
Right.
or psychiatrist stuff of like, does Dan get to like go to London and tell all his new London buddies, yeah, I did business with Jeff Bezos and I got $7 billion of his dollars. And the next highest bid was $6 billion. Like, he gets to win the deal and he gets more money. Like, I could see that. But Grant, I think, obviously the smoke right now is much, much more on the non-Bezos camp, which is in the speculation column for sure. But, betting against the richest guy in the room at a business deal is always a risky proposition. So if
the Seahawks weren't going to be sold potentially,
that's also a great point.
Couple of years, I think all of this conversation would be different, because the way I've been told to understand it is Bezos wants in, whether it's Washington or not, into the NFL, right? And he has obviously ties to, I think, is from that area.
Yes.
There's no one that hates his guts in Seattle that's going to make it harder for him. So, I mean, like, whether or not this goes well, he'll be a 1 seed playing a 16 seed, and I don't think any of them are going to be fairly picked when the Seahawks come up for bid.
Grant Paulsen, you can catch him every afternoon, 2 to 6:30 on 106.7 The Fan. Also, the Bust and Loose Baseball podcast, a podcast full of sadness. It's not Grand Danny's fault though.
That's what we put on the chyron at the bottom, actually. Right where it says "Take Command" on the left, it says "Bust and Loose Baseball," and on the right, it says "A podcast full of sadness."
Grant, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks,
real
Grant.
quick, can I ask you guys a football question?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you got more time, we can keep you and talk a little football for the next 20 minutes if you want.
So I have a football question I want to bounce off you.
Okay.
It's a comment that I want your takes on. Okay.
Okay.
I think that this front office and this coach is way too conservative in the offseason, and it drives me nuts. Now, their counter is, we like our guys. And to that I say, I like them too, to go 7-10. Enough already. Like, where is my urgency? Where is my aggressiveness? And this is not like a hot takey sports talk radio thing, I promise. But what are we doing? What is the plan in this town? What I don't understand. Ron Rivera is going into, in my opinion, what is a gotta-have-it year. You make the playoffs or you're out. You win a playoff game or you might be out. Like, that's a reasonable take in year 4 when you've been sub 500 3 times. And I know they technically were 500 with a tie last time at 8-1. But they won a division with 7 wins. Like, no. How about no on that? So this has been 3 years of sub 500 football. He's going into an offseason where, with a new owner, he might actually deserve to keep his job and still be out of luck with a new owner that hires a new GM and a new head coach. And I'll feel terrible for the guy if that happens. He's a good dude, and I root for him. I like him. But the quarterback plan I've signed off on, I'm fine with. I'm surprised he's going that route again in a gotta-have-it year where Sam Howell, after like 19 passes, you go from thinking, yeah, I'm not really sure if this guy can start a Week 18 game that doesn't matter to he's my starter and he's going to run the show this offseason. And then you bring in Brissett, who's a career backup. So, again, not what I would do with my job on the line. If CK came in and said, you better do a great show today or you're out, I'd probably do things a little differently than just how I've been doing them when it wasn't working, but what have you. I digress. But like, the Cowboys go trade for Brandon Cooks. They have less – they don't have a lot of cap space. They've got a good receiver position. I would be doing the Giants thing. Where's my draft pick for Darren Waller? Like, where is Dalton Schultz with a suppressed tight end market right now to come in here and catch 70 passes? You're being cheap at quarterback on purpose so that you can build this thing up. Your biggest move is Andrew Wiley, an offensive tackle who gave up 9 sacks last year, who signed below market on day 1 of free agency, which tells you about how many suitors he was expecting to have. They've brought in a tackle who might be an upgrade, but isn't a stud. They brought in Wes Schweitzer 2.0, downgraded, turned the fader down a little bit. Like, they're doing, if this was year 1 of Rivera, awesome. I love what they're doing. It's year 4, and I just don't get the vision. Are they as good as the Eagles? No. Are they closing the gap? I don't think so. Are they as good as the Giants right now, who they tied with last year? No. The Cowboys? No. Like, what is the plan? What am I missing?
Yeah. So if I was going to kind of make a counter argument to you, one, I'm glad you brought the tight end position. And one, I think they are incredibly high on the young tight ends. And I think when you look at Ron and you look at what they've done over the past couple of years, like they have done a good job of betting on development. And I know that's kind of a risky proposition, but I look at Derek Forrest and what he did from year 1 to year 2. I think they're expecting a similar jump from Percy Butler. I think they look at a guy like Armani Rogers, a guy like Cole Turner, Curtis Hodges, like they are so high on those guys. And it's not without reason, right? Because like you look at them, you say tight end is a traits-driven position. Those guys have more traits than you could possibly want. They're all tall. They're all converted wide receivers. Now, you're asking for development, right? Which, again, I understand that's a little bit, kind of gets a weird feeling in your stomach. But for whatever reason, this staff has done a really nice job with that. Now, with regards to the offensive line, I am frustrated by that move, right? I think Andrew Wiley is a fine player. I don't think he's a great player. I think he's a guy that in Kansas City was elevated tremendously by what Eric Bieniemy and Andy Reid did to insulate him, right? And I think he can do stuff for you, but he's definitely a scheme fit. So maybe what you're saying, if you're Ron, is we're going to buy low, get a guy who fits the scheme, who understands Bieniemy, understands this offense. Bieniemy can call a game to insulate him, and we're going to be okay because we're going to bump one of the most athletic linemen in the NFL into guard. Hopefully he develops there, and we're going to have a nice kind of duke it out position flex at the left guard. To me, that's the most risky element because in terms of making a big move for like a skill position guy, like you want – like you're not going to find a better receiver to kind of flush out that room. Jahan's going to develop. Terry's one of the best in the league. Curtis is fantastic. The running back situation, I think you feel pretty good about. The other thing to consider here too, Grant, is that this is one of the deepest tight end draft classes I've ever seen. And also at running back, it's ridiculously deep. Like you could get a really, really explosive, good football player in the 5th or 6th round. And so I think that is factoring into it. I also think they kind of put their eggs in the Daron Payne basket and said, this is who we want to be. So can you trade for guys? Absolutely. But I think that just to kind of give you, they love some of the young pieces that they have here. They love them.
Which I totally get. And I like them too. I guess my point, like I'm pulling the helicopter up to like 10,000 feet in a way.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is like, okay, I guess we'll just wait again, like, and hope.
Yeah.
And when does that stop? You're in year 4. Your quarterback situation is a guy who's throwing less than 20 passes and the backup. Like that generally doesn't net you where you want to go, number one. Now, I'm okay with the plan. I'd be a lot more happy if it was the first year of a regime, but right. I'm perfectly fine with the plan. I think this is probably what they should have done a couple of years ago, frankly. Right. And I happen to like how you talk about traits. I think he's better than Heineke in everything. Like Heineke's faders are all at 5 and Howell's are at 7 or 8. He's got better arm. He's more mobile and athletic. Like I think he's got some of the same gamer tendencies. So I think he'll be okay. But I guess my point is, you mentioned Payne. I wouldn't have done that for the record. I know I'm in the minority, but I'm not paying 2 tackles that money. That money goes to offense. This league is about scoring points. And yes, it is also about stopping teams from scoring points, but it's Alan Orr for me. Like everything they do to me sometimes feels like they don't have one big vision. Like they drafted a D tackle in the 2nd round last year. Mm-hmm. They paid John Allen. They drafted D tackle in the 2nd round. Well, clearly at that point, you're not expecting to pay Payne. Well, I guess then he has the 11 sack breakout. I don't love signing guys to crazy contracts when 1 year in a contract year is unlike all the other years. And
also to your point, Grant, one of the things about Payne and that signing that I think is interesting is that his pressure rate is 9.8. It was 9.8 last year. It was 9.8 the year before that. And I think what you're seeing is that even though the pressure rate is the same, the sack rate is the number that fluctuates, and the sacks are the numbers that get paid. So he could easily regress to a position where he's a 3-sack guy again, and do you feel good about that contract number if he's a 3-sack guy again? And so what I'll say to you about the quarterback situation specifically is they weren't going to go out and pay big money for a quarterback because they got burned real bad. And I will say I just did a breakdown of Jacoby Brissett, and last year, like he was playing at a starting caliber level. Now, do you get that same player here? I have no idea. But I think that signing might be the most significant to your kind of perspective, your 1,000-foot helicopter view. If Sam Howell doesn't go, or if he's not where you think he's at, which again is a big concern for me, you have a guy who is about as close as you're going to get to a starter, a good pro, been in multiple offenses, learned multiple offenses. And quite frankly, when you watch the film of him compared to Carson Wentz last year, you feel much better about him coming in and elevating the offense, which is
I
interesting.
love that move. Like, this
Yeah.
was the guy that I wanted. But, and this is not fair to Jacoby Brissett, is what I'm about to say.
I love it.
I don't want him playing. Like,
Right.
I don't care if he plays well.
Sure.
That's a disaster for me. In your fourth year, if you go to Jacoby Brissett, with all due respect, who's the guy I wanted as the backup and the caretaker, if something happens to Hal, he gets hurt, whatever, awesome. You play Brissett and you try to win as many games as possible. But if Sam Howell struggles, the plane runs into the mountain here, and you go to Brissett for 9 starts, it's over, Johnny. Like, I don't care if he has 20 touchdowns and 4 picks. Like, that isn't interesting to me in the future, in the long term. You're back in the quarterback market. The only thing I would go ahead.
Well, what I would say is, like, if your concern is for Ron Rivera, everything you're saying is true. If you really want to take the helicopter up, though, this is perfect. Either it works with Sam Howell or you bust and you completely start over. And what you
which is why I'm in on this plan.
Right. What they've done for a decade is hire a coach, have the owner force a quarterback on the coach, have a screwed up time cycle of those two things, mess up the quarterback, that gets the coach fired. But the new coach is now stuck with the old quarterback, and it happened. Robert, they screwed up the Kirk contract. Then obviously Haskins, they try to bring Alex in. That goes bad for a very different reason. Jay gets like, this cycle finally breaks. The new owner comes in, new coach, new GM, new quarterback. Everyone's on the same page, and you go from there. And like, that's great. Or Sam is actually a steal. You found someone in the 5th round. You don't have to pay him for multiple years, and you have an actual starting caliber quarterback for the first time in a long time, and you proceed forward with Ron or the new coach. But like, to me, if your focus is like, what are you doing, Ron Rivera, for the sake of yourself? Totally agree with you. It doesn't, like, there is an element of like, we're really and it hit me really hard at the combine, because you kind of get out of the media bubble, the DC media bubble, and I'm talking to other folks from around the league, and they're like, so they're really going to start Howell, huh? And it's like, yeah, he's pretty good. People are like, how do you know? And I'm like, I mean, he looks fine. And they're like, I liked him, but like, really? And so you kind of have that reality check. But I do think that when you get above the looking out for Ron Rivera's well-being, this is ideal for the first time in a long time.
Yes, yeah. I agree with that. And the good teams, well, forget the good teams. The right situation, the process should be a GM is empowered, which doesn't happen here. But my hope is, for the first time in my adult life, with a new owner perhaps next year, they will actually have a actual football GM that is the overseer of the building. And then that person will hire a head coach, and that person will pick his quarterback, because that 1, 2, 3 process is the best one. And they have never done that one here since they were winning Super Bowls. Everyone's like, they've tried everything. No, they haven't. They have not had a GM pick a coach who picks his quarterback in that order. And so that's my sincerest hope. And, just on the same level, my hope would be Howell's awesome. They win a ton of games, and the Martys get to high five Ron all the way to the NFC Championship game this year. And there's a big Marty party on the team flight. That would be awesome too. But
I do. I also want to go ahead.
Starting over and ripping off the Band-Aid.
And I also think that this roster, when you look around the roster, so go position by position, is closer than people think. Now, it's got a couple key cogs that need to be kind of looked at draft this year. I wish they would have handled offensive line specifically, like just been a little bit more aggressive there. Not that I dislike Weiler, I dislike Gates. I just think just be a tick more aggressive there. But they could screw around and win a playoff game. Like if Howell even plays to like just slightly plus. And I think when you look at Jacoby Brissett in Cleveland, right, they would have been easily a playoff team if he had started the whole year, right? So I think there is a world, and I've said this on this podcast before, where it's like they walk in, and I think it's because the roster is sneaky good. Now they need to hit on a lot of draft picks to make this go. They still need to do some stuff, but to me, it's not crazy to think that Ron, again, like, I don't know if I was Ron, I don't know if I would have done anything differently outside of the quarterback.
That was gonna be my question for you, Grant. Is I hear everything you're saying, but my question is kind of, then what would you have done? And if the answer is like, well, I would have traded for Jalen Ramsey, like, okay, that's an interesting conversation.
No, here's I got it for you. Because I have been asked this by listeners and callers, and I've had to go through it. So two things, right? Number one, you said you would have liked them to have been more aggressive, helping out the offensive line. I would just put a period after aggressive. They don't do it. They don't have that bone in their body. They can't.
But I guess like what? Because to me, the only position group that they weren't aggressive at that needed a significant upgrade was the offensive line.
Okay,
this is the way I look at it.
This is two-parter, right? Number one, that's a big deal. Like their biggest priority is offensive line. I was told the day they said that they were rolling with Sam Howell, and I was texting people over there, it's a two-pronged plan that it's Sam Howell and we're going to kick ass getting better on the offensive line.
Right.
I'm waiting. Okay,
Right.
that hasn't happened. That's a big deal.
And for fans, real quick, this offensive line draft, especially where they're going to be picking at 48 and 16, is pretty good. So maybe you're counting on that. I don't know, but just I need to
Logan,
say that.
you've said this too, right? If they draft Anton Harrison in the first round, who's ready to play right tackle tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And then they kick Wiley to left guard. Now you have a pretty good line.
Now it looks good. It looks really good because Wiley's a good offensive lineman who's he's a good guard. So yeah, but just want to put that out there for people. Anyway, go ahead.
So, but like as an example, when you say like, what would you have done differently, or how could they have done something differently? Like Orlando Brown was just added for well below market value.
Right.
I'm in on that. Like it's okay to get really good players. Sure. It's okay to do that sometimes. I know 100%. That they would prefer to get guys that are middling, but I really like good players. I have this weird thing about me. So that's number one. Number two, we look at the roster, okay, and we go like and I'm not joning on you, Logan, but yeah. I'm just making a point. We go, okay, they're set here. Like, it's okay to get outside the box.
100%.
Like, here's what I would do. I would trade this year's number one and a fourth next year right now to the Bengals for T. Higgins, who supposedly won a first-round pick for T. Higgins.
Right.
T. Higgins, who they can't or they shouldn't probably and aren't expected to sign because they have to give Joe Burrow $50 million a year and pay Jamar Chase. So it's unlikely that he gets $23 million or whatever he wants. Then I'm shopping Curtis Samuel. Like now I've got Terry McLaurin, T. Higgins, and I've got Jahan Dotson under contract. Or Dotson gets paid after Terry's contract essentially is over 3 years from now. Like it's okay to just be really good and aggressive to add weapons.
Yeah.
I would sign Dalton Schultz, who's 26 and productive, tomorrow. And I love him. I don't like, people losing their jobs, but you save $5 million, you move on from Logan Thomas, a couple of years since he was particularly productive. And I use that's over half of what, that's about half of what I'm going to pay Dalton Schultz on a suppressed tight end market.
And so, I agree. But I think like, that's one thing that like, I think fans need to be aware of. Like, let's take T. Higgins as an example. Like, I think he is elevated tremendously by Joe Burrow. And I don't think you get the same player going from Joe Burrow to Sam Howell. And so you're going to fork over a first and a fourth for a guy who is going to be way less productive. You're going to have to pay a ton of money. You're going to have to pay more than Terry probably to get him here, right? And so I look at that and I say, is that the right move for this team in the current roster construction? And I look at the Dalton Schultz. I think the Dalton Schultz thing is a little bit more interesting, right? Because I think you can get him at a fairly good number. The draft capital is not going to be as expensive.
Also way more realistic. Like
yes.
Real quick, let me say on Higgins, let me just say. So two things, I guess. One is that's the first idea I've come up with.
No, again, I'm not saying you want that, but I'm just saying for fans who want that.
My point is, it sounds like fantasy football. I'm saying it's okay to be aggressive, to like think outside the box. The roster is a fluid thing. Yeah. It's not like everything is set. And by the way, this idea that they can't get better here, or they're set here, they'd win more football games if they were just awesome everywhere. Like, I don't believe the idea that, they shouldn't do that. Like, no, go find a player who's available for some quirky reason and pay them. The cap is exploding.
Philly's a perfect example, right? Like, and now if you look at their process, like they pay O linemen, they do a good job of drafting and evaluating, developing O linemen. It allows them some flexibility on the outside to say, hey, we don't need to draft an O lineman in the first round because we can develop these players. We have all these excellent defensive, like I just look at that roster construction and I love what they're doing. They do a good job of trading guys ahead of time. They accrue first round draft capital. It allows them to do that, as opposed to kind of what you're talking about, where it's like every year it's like, well, we really need this first round pick because we need to get a good ball player. It's like, gosh, there's other ways to allocate that resource. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Grant. It's just like, playing fantasy football isn't always the right solution, but like when you allocate, when your evaluation's sound, when you've planned for that, Like, think about Philly. They have 2 first-round picks next year or whatever it is. Like, they've planned to allocate resources when they need resources. And I sometimes, I don't always feel that there is that forward-thinking approach like you're talking about.
Boom.
Yeah.
I've just had an awakening in the last, like, I have been the guy on the radio that's like shouted down callers with ideas like that for years. But a few years ago, my mindset has changed a little bit. I was listening to Tom Brady do an interview, and he was basically saying he's stunned that teams aren't more aggressive in the offseason and that the NFL is so methodical and kind of 4 years at a time. And he was basically like, you could upset the apple cart and just go for it. And we saw the Bucs bring him in and win. I know that's unique. The Rams said, this Goff guy got us to the Super Bowl. That's great. But let's go get Matt Stafford. And they win. The Eagles are good, and they trade for A.J. Brown and bring in C.J. Gardner-Johnson, and they get to the Super Bowl. I know Jalen Hurts' elevation was the biggest reason why. But I think we are – like, this group will never do that. And I kind of just want a more – they view the salary cap as like this scary monster under the bed, and I want someone who doesn't. I guess that's my big picture point.
Yeah, I mean, I think offensively, I like where they're at, in part because the way the Chiefs have won is having a bunch of 4-3 dudes all over the field. And like when you say shop Curtis Samuel, I'm like, hell no. Like that's their Tyreek Hill, that's their Deebo Samuel, that's their move piece. And if you can get a better version of it, fine. I don't know how many there are, though. A guy who can truly play running back, play some receiver, and is 4-3.
But the idea of him has been way better than the actual him.
I mean, he was pretty good last year.
Yes, but look at the last 6 weeks. I mean, he's a minimal factor for a lot of games. Like, now that's not his fault necessarily. And maybe Eric.
Well, that's kind of my thing, is like, he's the right piece for this scheme.
Let's hope so. But he was the 9th highest paid receiver in the NFL last year. Against
Sure.
He didn't get that production.
No, absolutely. But like, I think the thing with Bieniemy and what they've done with KC offensively is like, obviously Mahomes is the main engine, and we're trying to recreate that. Good freaking luck. He's one of one in NFL history, but they surrounded him with a bunch of dudes who ran 4-3. They have that here with Gibson, with McLaurin, with Dotson, with Samuel. Schultz, absolutely. Offensive line, definitely more aggressive. But like we mentioned, C.J. Gardner-Johnson, he just signed for not a whole lot of money in Detroit on a 1-year prove-it deal. You could wait for Percy Butler to develop, or you could go sign C.J. Gardner-Johnson. Like those are the kinds of moves and upgrades that I'm 100% with you, where it's like, yes, development is cool, and when it works, it's really rewarding, and you get to pat yourself on the back for doing a great job in the draft and developing guys, and that's fantastic. Or you just get a guy who could play.
But also, like, it's important. I agree with both of you, but also look at positions that don't transfer well, like DB free agent acquisitions. We just got to experience that firsthand. Traditionally, don't do well, right? So I think that's one of those things that you just got to kind of call attention to. Like, the free agency is the right situation, but the evaluation has to be right. It just can't be like, this guy's available, let's go get him. You got to, the whole process has to be sound.
All right. That was great. I'm glad you kicked that. That was fun to kick around.
I just wanted to hear you. Yeah. I wanted to see what you guys thought. And I'm with you, Logan. I fit is more important than skill, but like, good football players win games, man. Both of us are correct. Like, if you engage with a more aggressive mindset. Yeah. Right? I don't want to go, it doesn't need to be Dan Snyder in 2000. Correct. But like, this isn't working for me. This isn't putting the Triscuit crackers in my stomach.
We we look at all this stuff too, and the kind of silly thing is, if Sam plays well, they'll win a bunch of games, and if he doesn't, none of the rest of it matters anyway. So there's, like, to a point, like, it just, what does the quarterback do? I guess I'll find out this fall. You can catch Grant, of course, 106.7 The Fan, 2 to 6:30 each and every weekday. Bustin' Loose Baseball podcast, as well as previously mentioned, a podcast full of sadness. Grant, thanks for making this one a little bit happier today. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you guys. That was fun.
Thanks, bud.
Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 106.7 The Fan's YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.